Hello and welcome to Korean Politics Debrief with me, Kwon Young-gook. So, Election Day is almost upon us. This is going to be the last podcast I do before Election Day, and it is going to be another short one. No interview once again, unfortunately. I apologise for that. I've had some difficulties scheduling interviews, but I am looking to pick them up again after the election. So today I just wanted to give my final thoughts before the big day and on some things to look out for as well. First, a quick look back at the last couple of weeks. It's been fairly quiet, all things considered. I was expecting some final twists and turns, the proverbial October surprise, and while there have been some controversies, it hasn't been anything too seismic. The Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung has fairly consistently led the polls by about 10 to 15 percentage points or so ahead of the People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo. After the first televised debate, the Reform Party candidate Lee Jun-seok seemed to pick up some potential votes in the polls, but it wasn't a surge. Actually, briefly on the televised debates, the first debate on the economy was arguably the dullest, and that I think led to viewing figures to drop off for the next two. It felt like all the candidates in the first one were still trying to find their feet, trying to find their voice. Lee Jun-seok probably came out on top in that debate, showing that he had the strongest knowledge and policy ideas, but he failed to look presidential. I know that's kind of vague, but it's just about how he holds himself, the types of questions he was asking. He seemed to be more interested in asking questions to Lee Jae-myung rather than laying out his own policy. In the second debate on social issues, Kim Moon-soo found his voice, attacking Lee Jae-myung with vigour, but very much speaking to his own conservative base. Some low blows about Lee Jae-myung's character and some of the legal issues that he's embroiled in. But as I said, that was very much just speaking to the converted already, and it was unlikely to have won over any moderates who knew about all of these issues already anyway. But Kim and Lee Jun-seok's attacks seemed to unsettle Lee Jae-myung a little bit, and he had the weakest performance, in my opinion, in the second debate. There seemed to be a slight wobble in the polls afterwards for Lee Jae-myung, perhaps because of this. But he seemed to find his feet again in the third debate on political issues, and it was the most controversial of the three debates, of course, because of a rather bizarre and tasteless attack by Lee Jun-seok on Lee Jae-myung. It was something about Lee Jae-myung's son posting on an online message board in the past, allegedly promoting sexual violence against women using chopsticks. It all rather left a bad taste in the mouth. It was an attempt to smear Lee Jae-myung's character via his son, but it backfired on Lee Jun-seok horribly. It was the biggest headline from the debates, and he has issued apologies since then. Now, some have billed the debates as the worst ever, the dirtiest, the mudslingiest of presidential debates. But for me, while blow for blow it might have been the most number of personal attacks that we've seen, none of the content was actually particularly new. These were all faults that we knew about all of the candidates. All of Kim Moon-soo's attacks on Lee Jae-myung, as I said, we'd heard them all before. They were, in fact, a rehash of the 2022 election debate accusations. Even Lee Jun-seok's terribly misguided attack on Lee Jae-myung's son was something that first came out in 2022. I felt it was always going to be hard to have a substantive debate at this time because there was so little at stake. Lee Jae-myung was so far ahead in the polls that he didn't need to put on a great performance, just an adequate one. And while Kim Moon-soo and Lee Jun-seok's only chance was trying to bring Lee Jae-myung down somehow and force a mistake from him rather than raise themselves up. So, although it was not a pretty sight, it was perhaps expected. And hopefully future presidential debates will be better. It can't get much worse from here. But a special mention does have to go out to the fourth candidate who was on the stage, Kwon Young-gook of the Democratic Labour Party, formerly the Justice Party. I think most people who turned on the first debate will have been surprised to even see him up there. And while he was never considered a serious or consequential contender, he played, I think, an important role in raising progressive issues, speaking up for the socially vulnerable, something which I feel we would have sorely missed in these elections if he hadn't been on that debate stage. He will, I think, have won over quite a few fans as well, I feel, on the left, of course, and he's almost single-handedly put the party back on the map after a couple of very difficult years. So all the polls before the blackout period on opinion polls showed Lee Jae-myung in the lead, and it didn't seem that the debates had changed much, especially with no merger between Kim and Lee Jun-seok. And so it does look almost certain that Lee Jae-myung will win this election. Actually, briefly on that merger, there was a lot of speculation of will they, won't they, or more specifically, will Lee Jun-seok merge or won't he? Now, while there were some arguments for E to merge candidacies for the good of the Conservative Party, for the sake of the nation, I think the fact that it didn't happen once again shows how much of an ideologue Lee Jun-seok actually is. He's never been someone who's compromised, never someone who's made friends to get ahead. He's always been quite stubborn in that way, and some have argued that this is his biggest weakness, in fact, that he'll never get to the top because he's not a team player enough. We'll see on that, but he did stick to his guns. He drew a line in the sand and said that he won't hold hands with a party that brought about martial law, and he stuck with it till the end, so no merger, and we'll see how much of the vote share he does end up getting himself. On that note, let's look ahead to the big day then. There are various things that I'm looking out for. First is the turnout and what that might tell us. So if the turnout is low, then I think that will spark debate about whether this showed a lack of enthusiasm for the candidates this time, that it was once again a pick among the lesser of evils. It could also mean that Conservatives came out to vote less, disillusioned with their party, but also not being able to bring themselves to vote for Lee Jae-myung or Lee Jun-seok. For that, we'll have to see the turnout in the Conservative strongholds, especially of the so-called TK-PK regions, North and South Gyeongsang provinces. But if the turnout is high, then that could suggest that there was a desire to cast judgment on the previous administration. If the turnout is high, that could translate to a high Lee Jae-myung vote as well. Just for reference, the 2022 election saw a turnout of 77.1%. 2017, when Moon Jae-in won, that saw 77.2% turnout. And 2012, when Park Geun-hye won, that saw 75.8%. Now, for Lee Jae-myung, the question will be how wide his margin of victory is. And did he pass that 50% threshold of the vote share? Initially, there were some who suggested that he might be able to pass 51.55%, the record set by Park Geun-hye, the highest vote share since modern democratization. But I think few people are thinking that now, especially with the vote share being split by 3 candidates, of course, 4 if you include Kwon Young-gook as well, who could end up taking some votes from the left, especially after his noteworthy TV debates. Now, if Lee Jae-myung does pass 50%, that would be seen as a final massive condemnation of the past administration, and it would give Lee the wings to start his administration off with a bang. If it doesn't pass 50% though, and he's actually within 10 percentage points of Kim Moon-soo, there will be more muted celebrations, I feel, and it would signal that this was a vote not in support of E as such, but more of a begrudging vote against the PPP. So that could also mean that there's no honeymoon period for the new Lee administration. The thinking would be, okay, so we voted you in. Let's see what you can do. Prove to us what you can do. And so if he doesn't start well, the mood could turn quite quickly. I think it would be similar to what we've been seeing in the UK, where the Labour Party, despite a landslide win in the general election last year, hasn't been polling well. The sentiment hasn't been great. So a narrower margin of victory would put pressure on the Lee administration right away. Let's move on to Kim Moon-soo. A loss within 10 percentage points would be seen as, in the end, I think, an admirably fought campaign. But that would give the current people running the party less incentive to reform as well. There's a risk that they would blame the loss on Kim Moon-soo rather than a problem with the party itself. Whereas if the margin of error is greater, it might give more momentum for those who want to reform the party. I think that's what's at stake for the PPP. And for Lee Jun-seok, his aim would be to pass 10%. Just a couple of weeks ago, after the first debate, some thought that he might be able to gain as much as 15%. But the polls have shown that he's failed to pick up that sort of momentum, and the third debate will likely have had a negative impact as well. I think 10% will prove that he is a credible political force by himself, and it will put pressure on the PPP to pivot towards E as well. But if it's less than 10%, I think many would start doubting whether he is someone who can lead the Conservative to success again in the future. Finally, it would be tough, but one more thing to look out for. If Kwon Young-gook can pass 3%, then that would mean, I think, that the Democratic Labour Party would be invited back to the next presidential debate. I think many people would welcome that. Some would argue against that. Some have said the debates were too unwieldy with 4 candidates on stage. But that is something I'm looking out for as well. Now, the polls will close at 8 p.m. Korea Standard Time on June 3rd. Last time, Yoon Suk-yeol's win was declared at around 3:20 a.m. by KBS. But in 2017, I understand it was called for Moon Jae-in a little earlier, around 2 a.m. And I expect this time that it will be called by broadcasters fairly quickly as well, considering the expected margin of victory. But we shall see. Right, well, that's it. Another chapter in Korean history is about to be closed. An ignominious chapter, unfortunately, of failed martial law, another impeachment, and a very contentious 3-year presidency. What new dawn awaits us, we shall see. Join me again next time on Korean Politics Debrief. If you have any questions, suggestions, or comments, please drop me a line on koreanpoliticsdebrief@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, as always, and happy election day. See you again next time.